Hi, this is Raman, your tutor from Alberta Real Estate School. In today's video, I will address a question that I get asked all the time. What should you memorize? So let's dive in.
Today, let's talk about a topic that I do get asked about quite often. What should I memorize? Many times I'll hear that people are memorizing questions and answers to the quizzes or activities. Now, if you are going to memorize something, this is not the best way to go about it. First of all, I would highly recommend not memorizing stuff, but instead, what you want to do is you want to understand the concept. So if you understand the concept, then it doesn't matter what question they ask you on the exam, you will be able to answer any question on that topic. Whereas if you're trying to memorize information, then one, you're relying on your brain to be able to come up with that information, retrieve that information from your brain under pressure when you're in the middle of the exam. Plus, when they ask you questions on the exam, it's not the same questions that you will see in the quizzes. So if you're memorizing stuff from the quizzes, you are going to be stuck in the exam. So you want to make sure you're not memorizing stuff, but you do need to understand the concept. So what is the best way to go about preparing for the exam if memorization is not the key to doing that? Let's take a look. So first thing I suggest you do is divide the information into chunk the information up, and that will help you draw logical connections between different pieces of information. And that's the best way to get that information stored in your brain so that you're able to retrieve it when you need it the most under pressure. Okay, so how do we do that? So when we are chunking information, one of the questions you want to ask, or some of the questions you want to ask, will be who, what, where, when, and why. So let's take a look at how we would apply that to one of the concepts. Okay, let's take a look at Davor Act. Davor Act is one of those things that is always tested on the exam. And this is not about this particular exam. Previous exams, every single time there is a question on the Davor Act, because Davor Act is very, very important topic. This is something that we will come up across a lot in our practice. If you're working as a real estate agent, Davor Act is something you do need to know about. And that's why this is a topic that always shows up on the exam. So let's break it down. First of all, what is Davor Act? So ask yourself the question, what? Now, Davor Act protects the rights of untitled spouse in a matrimonial home, which means if there is one person on the title and that person is married, the spouse that is not on the title, that spouse's rights will be protected. That means the title spouse, the person who is listed on the certificate of title, will not be able to dispose of the property, which means sell, mortgage, lease the property without the consent of the untitled spouse. So if two people are married and only one person is on the title, they're not able to sell the property without the consent from the second person who is not on the title. And what happens if the person dies? If the person who is on the title dies, it then creates a life estate for the untitled spouse in the property, which means that this person who is not on the title will be able to use the property. They'll be able to control the property, live in the property, lease it, however they choose to, or whatever they choose to do with the property, they are able to do it for their lifetime. Now, once this person dies, the estate will then pass to whoever the fee simple owner of the property is, which means if the person who was on the title willed it to someone, the property will then pass on to that person after the title or the untitled spouse dies. So this is the Davor Act. So what do we need to know? First of all, the definition. What is it? It protects the rights of the untitled spouse in a matrimonial home. And what does this mean? It means that the person who's on the title, if there's only one person on the title, they're not able to sell that property without the consent of the other spouse. And if the person who's on the title dies, it will then create a life estate for the person who's not on the title, so that way they have a place to live, so that they are not on the street when that title spouse dies. So that's Davor Act. Now, when does it apply? In order to answer that question, we have to ask 3 more questions. First, is the person legally married? If 2 people are legally married, then Davor Act will apply if there's only 1 person on the title. And then that's the second question, is there only 1 name on the title? In this case, Davor Act would apply. And then third question we have to ask is, has either spouse resided in the home after getting married? This is very important. So there can be circumstances where one person purchased the property prior to the marriage. So they brought the property into the marriage. In that case, if both of them are living in the property, or even one person has lived in the property since the time of the marriage, then Davor Act would apply. And this is where we'll have to make sure that we do something about it. The next question is, what do we need to do in case the Davor Act applies? So after we have asked these questions, now let's say there is only 1 person on the title, people are legally married, they're living in the property. What do we do now? In this case, it's very important, first of all, that we check the certificate of title. We need to confirm that there's only 1 person on the title. And then second step we'll have to do is we'll have to get the dower consent signed from the untitled spouse, the person that is not listed on the title. And this way we'll be able to list the property and not get in trouble. The other option is dower release getting signed. The difference between dower consent and dower release is dower release basically releases all the rights of the spouse. So that means that spouse is basically saying, I have nothing to do with this property, and the title spouse can do whatever they choose with the property. Dower consent, on the other hand, doesn't release all the rights every time when we go list the property, or we do a transaction, we'll have to get the dower consent signed. So this is not, it doesn't release the rights forever. It's only applies to that particular transaction. Next step that we have to do after we get the dower consent signed would be to add the dower consent to the brokerage file. It is very important for us to make sure we are keeping all the trade records, and this is an important thing because we do not want to get in trouble after. So we have to make sure we put it in our brokerage file. All right, so the next thing is, what type of questions can we expect on this topic? So in terms of the exam question, there are 2 types of questions. One would be the definition question. So any topic that we look at, there are always 2 types of questions that can be on the exam. In terms of the definition question, this will be a straightforward definition question. So for example, which of the following statements best describe the term Dower Act? A, it protects the rights of the titled spouse in the matrimonial home when there's a sole owner on the certificate of title. Or B, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held in joint tenancy. Option C, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when there is a sole owner on the certificate of title. Or D, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when property is held as tenants in common. So these are the 4 options. And in this case, the correct answer is C. So the definition of Dower Act is that Dower Act protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when there's a sole owner on the certificate of title. So there has to be 2 people who are married living in their property, and there's only 1 person on the title. In terms of the different options here, some of these options will look very similar. And what you want to do is, as you're answering the questions, you want to look at each option individually. So let's take a look at option A here. So it says it protects the rights of the title spouse. Title spouse, we do not need to protect the right of the title spouse because the title spouse is already on the title. So they already have the right to the property. Their rights do not have to be protected. So that one is incorrect. Option B here, it says it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held in joint tenancy. If the property is held in joint tenancy, that means there are two people on the title. And when there are two people on the title, when both the couple, both of them are on the title, we do not need to get a dower consent signed. In that case, dower consent or Davor Act won't even apply. Option C is correct one. Option D here, it protects the rights of the untitled spouse in the matrimonial home when the property is held as tenants in common. So here, again, this is a trick one here, because when they're talking about tenants in common, there are two people on the title. So in this case, when both of the spouses are on the title, we do not need to worry about Davor Act. They will both have to sign the contract anyway. So that option doesn't apply. So all three of these options that are incorrect are actually they are tricky. They're trying to trick you because they're putting two different things together. So we will cross all those out, and we have the correct one, which is answer C. Now, the second type of question you may see on the exam would be scenario questions. So scenario questions are where they will give you a scenario and you will have to come up with a correct answer. So let's take a look. In this case, John is a real estate professional with prime brokerage helping Sam and Melissa purchase their new home. On pulling the title for the property, John sees that Melissa is the sole owner of the property as she had purchased the place prior to their marriage. Which of the following statements apply in this situation? Okay, option A, Davor Act does not apply as Melissa had purchased the property prior to their marriage. Option B, Davor Act does not apply as Sam and Melissa plan to use the property as a rental. Option C, Melissa needs to sign a dower release and register it on the title of the property. Or option D, Sam will need to sign a dower consent so Melissa can sell the property. In this case, the correct answer is D. It doesn't matter if the property was brought into the marriage. So if one person had the property prior to the marriage, because they are married and because either spouse or both the spouses have lived in the property, Davor Act would apply, which means the untitled spouse would have to give consent in order for the property to be sold. So in this case, the untitled spouse would be Sam because Melissa owned the property prior to marriage, but because they're living in this property right now, Davor Act would apply. So the correct answer in this case would be D. We would get Sam to sign the dower consent, and that would then go into the brokerage file. All right, so if this is the case, how can you prepare for the exam? So we had a look. So two things that we said. So the first type of question that you would see on the exam would be the definition question. The best way to prepare for definition questions would be to actually go through the glossary. There would be key terms in each unit that you're preparing. So make sure you make a note of the key terms and you understand those terms and you draw some logical conclusions from them and make sure you remember those. So this is where you can use some memorization. But again, don't rely on cramming the information, because if you cram too much information when it comes to the exam, everything will be muddled and you won't be able to recall that information. So when you're trying to memorize stuff, use that logical way of memorization so that you have logical relationships and you'll be able to recall that information on the exam. But if you are going to memorize anything, key terms would be the thing to memorize. Second option would be the scenario questions. The best way to prepare for the scenario questions is to go through all the examples. Each unit will have multiple examples for the different topics, and make sure you pay attention to those examples. A lot of times we want to skip through those examples because we think they're not important, but it's easy for them to turn those examples into scenario questions. So if you're familiar with the examples, doesn't matter what kind of scenario question they give you, your mind would be thinking along those lines already. So this is a good hack to prepare for those scenario questions. Just read the examples, and doesn't matter if they have different examples or different scenarios, you'll be able to answer those because you'll get used to looking at scenarios. A lot of times I find people just skip through those examples, but they are important. Another thing, of course, you can do is go through unit activities and quizzes. Again, these will provide you some extra practice, but don't rely on memorization here. Memorizing the answers is not good because one of the problems that happens when you memorize something is your brain starts to learn the pattern. So when you see that pattern on the exam, they will switch it up. But when you see the pattern, you will look for the answer that was in the quiz, but on the exam, the answer may be different because they are trying to trick you. They know you have gone through the quizzes, so now they will ask you a question in a different way. But if that answer is stuck in your mind, that will be the first thing that will come to you, and you may end up picking the wrong answer. So do make sure you go through the unit activities and quizzes to make sure you understand the topic, but don't try to memorize them. Just use them as a way to clarify the concept and test yourself. All right, so let's do a quick recap. The first thing is do not memorize stuff. Don't rely on memorization or cramming as a way to prepare for the exam. Instead, you want to make sure that you understand the concepts that they are trying to teach you in the course. One way to do this is to divide information into chunks and draw logical conclusions or logical relationship between different parts. Number 4, make sure you understand key terms because these will help you prepare for the definition type questions you will see on the exam. And then, of course, make sure you go through the examples. Make sure you go through all the examples in the book so that you are understanding, first of all, you're understanding how to apply the concept that you're learning. Plus, these examples will benefit you when you go write the exam. They will help you prepare for those scenario questions that they will ask. And of course, last but not least, make sure you do go through all the unit activities and quizzes because they will help you test your knowledge. So that's it for today. If you would like some extra help in preparing for the real estate exam or the mortgage brokerage exam, I invite you to check out the website www.albertarealestateschool.com. We have practice questions for various courses as well as notes, and of course I offer tutoring as well. So if you need help with any of those, I invite you to either call me or check out the website. The phone number is 587-936-7779. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like a recap of today's video in a PDF format, make sure you click on the link below. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.